life, and the minerals may possibly possess a kind of subtle life which man may not be aware of, part of the al-ghaib, part of the unseen. Scientists have discovered the signs of life and sensibility in minerals. And we'll always give you the proof of whatever I say, right? An explicit statement in the Holy Quran carries a validity and an authority which no physical science or rational argument can dispute. Fear of Allah is not the only cause which makes a stone fall down, for the ayat itself says that this cause operates only in the case of some stones. So there may be different causes which make stones fall down. Some of these causes may be purely physical, while one of them may be the fear of Allah. The simile given were not altogether unfamiliar to the Israelites, for they needed water, and they had seen it gush forth from one solid rock in 12 springs, and that's in verse 60 that we saw earlier. They had witnessed how a mountain crushed down when Allah revealed His glory in Surah 7 and verse 143. Their hearts, however, remained rigid and inflexible, no matter all that they'd seen. So what does this tell you, folks? Faith is not based on what we see, right? So they were given all these signs. We've been given signs. But the way that we see things spiritually is by our faith, by our iman, by asking for Allah. We ask Allah, oh Allah, reveal to me my demons. Reveal to me that which I need to know about my soul and that which I need to correct, and He does. He helps us to go out of the unseen, to lift the veil and to see who we really are so that we can correct. Today, we are with our handicapped and rational mind start questioning everything that goes against the science of our times. We fail to realize that science is taking turns and discovering new facts every day. It was only in 1848, for the first time, the notion was recorded that plants have feelings too. Dr. Gustav Theodor Fechner, a German professor, suggested the idea in his book, Nana. Experiments are continuing today to verify the theory. Many scientists accept this is a reality. New Scientist published an article by the name Stressed Plants Cry for Help in 1997. So let me ask you now, do you believe that rocks and plants feel?
Plants say plants.
The original question was wrong. Do you believe that rocks feel? That's okay.
Yes.
No, I like that.
No.
You don't? Let's see where you go from there. If minerals feel, just process that a little bit. I'm going to make you think today, even if you're fasting. So a thing which would have been impossible to imagine a few centuries back is accepted as a reality today by many. Plants are sentient. They experience pain, pleasure, or emotion such as fear and affection. And that they have the ability to communicate with humans and other forms of life in a recognizable manner. You weren't expecting this morning, I know.
The plants is
Quran has presented this sense of worship and feelings of inanimate objects in many places. Quran vividly mentions that everything that exists realizes the existence of Allah and is praising Him and obeying Him. So that what we call as non-living things realize their Creator, and they are performing their respective duties assigned to them by their Lord. An interesting scientific breakthrough in this field is the memory of subatomic particles. The theory that subatomic particles have memory was presented in 1935 and proved in 1982 by the experiments performed by Alain Aspect in Paris University. Aspect and his team discovered that under certain circumstances, subatomic particles such as electrons, are able to instantaneously communicate with each other, regardless of the distance separating them. It doesn't matter whether they are 10 feet or 10 billion miles apart. Somehow, each particle always seems to know what the other is doing. The problem with this feat is that it violates Einstein's long-held tenet that no communication can travel faster than the speed of light. Since traveling faster than the speed of light is tantamount to breaking the time barrier, this daunting prospect has caused some physicists to try to come up with elaborate ways to explain away aspects findings. Michael Talbot, The Holographic Universe. Michael Talbot says Western science has labored under the bias that the best way to understand a physical phenomenon, whether a frog or an atom, is to dissect it and study its respective parts. A hologram teaches us that some things in the universe may not lend themselves to this approach. If we try to take apart something constructed holographically, we will not get the pieces of which it is made. We will only get smaller holes. Hence, a bigger reality has to be understood before understanding these smaller things. And the bigger reality, as the Quran tells us in many different places, is that everything praises Allah, is obeying His command. If everything is praising Allah and obeying His command, do you think it has feelings?
Yes.
I'm doing. Let's see if we can prove it more. You might want to get your iPhones out. You might want to take a picture of this slide. I know some people like to do that. I'm not going to read all of these verses today, but in every one of these verses, the Quran speaks about the sentientness or the sentient nature of inanimate objects. We know that the molecular structure of every single being is vibrating, it is moving. Nothing is standing still. We are constantly moving, and every single thing in the earth is constantly moving. So you can read all of these verses. You can see how things that you would think don't have feelings are actually praising Allah. Get it right? The order in which the three kinds of stones have been mentioned is very subtle, and in view of the meaning and purpose intended, extremely expressive and significant. The verse places in the highest degree those stones whose effectivity is so strong that rivers gush forth from them and provide sustenance to beasts and men. In contrast to them, it has been suggested the hearts of the Israelites are so hard that they are incapable of feeling any sympathy for their fellow man, even in suffering and pain, and hence incapable of wishing to do them good. Sometimes I hear people say, I don't feel sorry for them one little bit. You'll be in a car with a Muslim, and you'll come off an exit, and there will be a homeless person. And they'll say, they need to get a job. They're just lazy. What kind of heart says that? And it's okay if you disagree with me. But I think that we fail to remember that when the mental asylums closed, those people were turned into the streets. So sometimes those people can't get a job. They can't maintain a job. But we will judge them with hearts like stones. In cognitive behavioral therapy, emotional deprivation occurs when children do not experience nurturance through attention, affection, warmth, and companionship. Empathy through understanding, listening, self-disclosure, mutual sharing of feelings, and protection being via strength, direction, and guidance. These children become children that tend to be hard-hearted children, and we call them in schools bullies. But they're just angry, stubborn children because they didn't get what they needed. Their hearts become hard. I know you're really a little bit shocked about this lecture today, but this is what I see in these verses, and this is what I think we need to see, because I think our ummah has become that way. When we go to the masjid and we turn people away, and we say to people, your prayers will not be accepted with that tattoo on your neck. What kind of heart does that? Because the masjid should be the hospital for those that are ailing. It should be the place where the hurting heart comes for healing. But when we say to a woman, astaghfirullah, your prayer won't be accepted, you've got nail polish on. I'm better than you and you're nothing. Isn't that what it sounds like?
Hypocrite.
Hypocrite.
Brother, would you mind going back to that slide that has all the name of the surahs? I forgot to get it on camera, so. Okay.
That's it right there.
I think it's fine. Thank you.
You're welcome.
The second one.
So, those of us who sometimes feel that no one can ever be available to us, we call that suffering from emotional deprivation. Some of us are not even emotionally available to ourselves because our hearts have become hard. So we're not even kind to ourselves. We beat ourselves up. We castigate our own selves. We condemn our own selves. We do it so much so that sometimes I'll ask people, what are your strengths? And they can't name them. And yet Allah gave us all of these strengths and all of these faculties, but we're blinded and spiritually. The order in which the three kinds of stones have been mentioned, sorry about that, I just read there. In the second degree come the stones which do serve the creatures of Allah, but to a lesser extent. To the lowest degree of activity belong those stones which do not befit any woman, but can they can at least feel the fear of Allah. But these Israelites were devoid of even the minimum degree of sensitivity. Allah criticized the children of Israel because they witnessed the tremendous signs in the ayat of Allah, including bringing the dead back to life. Yet, then after that, your hearts were hardened. Allah has saved many of us from many, many situations. And I really want you to look at your heart in the month of Ramadan. And I really was reluctant to do this lecture as my last lecture before I'm going to be gone 2 weeks because maybe people wouldn't come back.
No, we just might need to make some appointments and they're not going to be here.
But the important thing is that we really need to look at this, folks. Because my vision for our family, for the family of Islamic Society Leading American Muslims, is that we will transform our lives. And the only way you can transform your life is to really be able to honestly evaluate where your heart is. And if your heart is hard, if you find that you're angry all the time, it's because of unmet need. And I meet a lot of Muslims, and they're always angry. Everywhere you see them, they're angry. They have a grimace on their face. They're angry. So their hearts were like stones that never became soft. This is why Allah forbade the believers from imitating the Jews when He said in Surah 57:16, "Has not the time come for their hearts of those who believe in the oneness of Allah," Islamic monotheism, "to be affected by Allah's reminder, this Quran, and that which has been revealed of the truth, lest they become as those who received the scriptures, the Torah and the Injil before, those Jews and Christians who turned away from that divine guidance." And I believe that this speaks to us today I believe that this is what unmasked is all about. I really do. I believe this is the root that our hearts have been so hard on that we don't care. Last night I noticed in a masjid that the women were like sardines in a can, and yet there were 2 vacant rows that were probably at least 90 foot long. But the women were stuffed in a box. And yet we say that they were emancipated, and I want for my brother what I want for myself. I see a different picture. The other thing I want to say, that as we examine our hearts, it's important to always have gratitude. And perhaps one of the things that I did not promote enough in the unmosque event was gratitude. Shukr.
I did not understand what happened to that woman you said you saw.
What woman?
That woman you saw arrested, something wrong with that.
I'm sorry, I don't know right now. If it comes to me, we'll talk about it after class, but I'm not sure which woman you're talking about. So I believe that this is what the Ummah needs to see. Has not the time come for the hearts of those who believe in the oneness of Allah to be affected? What does the word affected mean? A lot of people mix up the word effect and affect. What does affect mean?
Change.
Change. And my prayer is that our hearts are going to be changed. That our hearts are going to be softened and pliable, like potter's clay in the hands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, molding and making us according to His will, according to the divine purpose of our life. And by the passage of time, the hearts of the children of Israel were unlikely to accept any admonition. You see, if you try to provide admonition to people sometime whose hearts are hardened, what do?
They rebel.
This is called stonewalling.
They don't
They
hear.
look up to the ceiling, or they look to the floor, and they completely tune you out. There's a verse in the Bible that says, all scripture is given by inspiration of God and is profitable for doctrine, reproof, and correction, that the man of God may be truly perfected. Trish, you heard that before, haven't you? The word truly means inside and out in that verse. There are those of us who become so hard-hearted that we think we're beyond reproach. We're not supposed to be, but how dare you tell me what to do? Anybody got time for that? Ain't none of your business what I do. Yeah, it's my business if I love you. Their hearts became harder than stones, with no hope of ever softening. Sometimes springs and rivers burst out of stones. Some stones split and water comes out of them, even if there are no springs or rivers around them. Sometimes stones fall down from mountain tops out of the fear of Allah. And indeed there are stones out of which rivers gush forth. And indeed there are of them stones which split asunder, so that water flows from them. And indeed there are of them stones which fall down for fear of Allah. Means that some stones are softer than your heart. They acknowledge the truth that you are being called to. Remember, Allah said that Allah is not unaware of what you do. Solid, inanimate objects possess a certain degree of awareness. Some claim that the ayat mentioned the stones being humble as a metaphor. However, Al-Razi, Al-Qurtubi, and other imams said that there is no need for this explanation because Allah creates this characteristic humbleness in stones. For instance, Allah said in Surah 33:72, truly we did offer al-amana, the trust to the heavens and the earth and the mountains, but they declined to bear it and were afraid of it. They were afraid of Allah's torment. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala offered this trust to the heavens and the earth. They're alive, folks. Everything is alive. It's only in our mind that things are dead, but are we alive? Is our heart alive? Is our heart gushing forth this fountain of life and this fountain of truth and this fountain of Quran that touches the heart of every person we see? Just a few verses, Surah 17:44. These are not the ones in the other slide, by the way. The seven heavens and earth, and all that is therein glorify Him. And the stars and the trees both prostrate themselves. Have they not observed things that Allah has created, how their shadows incline? And they will say to their skins, why do you testify against us? They will say, Allah has caused us to speak. We have a skin pathologist in our company today. How much skin do we lose off of our body a day that's dead skin?
Oh, a lot of it. It's every 4 months it's all renewed.
And every 4 months it's all renewed. But that very skin will testify against us that we say is dead. It has feelings. It has life. The Prophet ﷺ said, this Mount Uhud is a mount that loves us and that we love. And this, I think, will prove my point more than anything today. Similarly, the companions or the compassion of the stump of the palm tree for the Prophet is confirmed in authentic narration. In Sahih Muslim, it is recorded that the Prophet ﷺ said, I know a stone in Mecca that used to greet me with the salam before I was sent. I recognize this stone now. Do stones feel? Can they greet us with salam if they don't feel?
No.
This is part of the unseen, folks. This is the miraculous nature of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The signs of the creation.
So I'm not crazy if I talk to my plants then?
No, you're not crazy to talk to your plants. No, you're actually wise.
You're crazy for other reasons.
Okay.
Remember, no condemnation. I don't
eliminating,
my wife in the
eliminating.
parking lot now. He said about the black stone that on the day of resurrection it will testify for those who kiss it. That black stone in the Kaaba knows that I kiss it.
Can we just throw it like this?
You can throw it a kiss.
She was like, I don't want the first.
There are several other texts with this meaning. The scholars of the Arabic language disagreed over the meaning of Allah's statement and became as stones or even worse in hardness, after agreeing that or here is not being used to reflect doubt. So it's letting you know that the hearts are actually harder than rocks, or harder than stones. Ibn Kathir says, let me get to the right place here, that the last tafsir is similar to Allah's statement in Surah 2 and verse 17, their likeness is as the likeness of one who kindled a fire. And his statement in Surah 2:19 are like a rainstorm from the sky. Rainstorms have life. Thunder has life. You can study about the electrons and the protons and the life that's going on when we have our beautiful electric storms that knock out our TVs and our computers and all that. That's how powerful they are.
They're beautiful.
They do us a service so that we can get away from the computer sometimes. I want to get to another part. A mosque is a result of hard-heartedness and stubbornness. Hard-heartedness is a sin against the law. Hardness of heart is used to designate an unfeeling state of sensibility. But when hardness of heart is spoken of as a sin, the terms designate the command of the will to a false position, a stubbornness in regard to the claims of God, an attitude of disobedience, self-will. And as I say these things, I really want you to comment, folks, what comes up for you.
What do you mean by the attitude of disobedience and stuff?
The act of disobedience is any time that Allah says do something and you don't do it. Or He says don't do something and you do it. That's an act of disobedience. And your heart has to be pretty hard when you know that your very life is dependent upon Allah. That your very heart is beating because of Allah. And yet, because of hardness, you can say, no, I'm not going to do that. I know the Quran says do that, but I'm not going to do that. I know the Quran says don't do that, but I'm going to do that. And of course, I know we don't do that, right? When a child is stubborn, stands out against parental authority, we speak of him as hard-hearted, and is hardening his heart against the claims and authority of his parents. How much more do we stand against the claims of Allah? The effects of hard-heartedness. And I hope you'll chime in here because I just went crazy brainstorming about what I'd seen in my practice about the effects of hard-heartedness. And I'd like you to add to this. A lack of frankness or sincerity of expression is one of its effects and manifestations. The will is committed in an incongruent attitude. Consequently, in this state, the mind will manifest an uncandid spirit in regard to reality. In other words, we pretend that we don't know what's going on. We'll say, I don't know what happened. I just don't understand. And that's how we do it. Megan, do you see this ever?
Yes, constantly.
Yes. People that are addicted to drugs and alcohol, it's never their fault. Most people that are in prison say, it's not my fault that I'm here. And they're convinced of that. In 18 years as an imam in the prison setting, I never had an inmate come and say I was guilty for what I was in prison for. Never once. Hence, it will be very hard to convince. It is difficult to carry conviction home to a mind where the heart is hard. The will girds itself and uses the intellect unfairly. In denial, it will evade reality. It will cavil and divert attention from the truth. Change the subject, in other words. It will resort to various shifts to avoid the conviction of error and wrong. In therapy, we call this intellectualizing. We come in and people are in pain. Their hearts are hardened. Perhaps they've been through a number of divorces. They have been abused. And they will begin to intellectualize things, not connect to the heart. And I'll say, hold on a minute. Let's go about 18 inches lower below your brains. Let's go to your heart. Let's communicate from the heart. Prejudice is another of its effects and manifestations. Prejudice is prejudgment. It is one-sided. The mind made up without the full examination of all sides of the question. The mind is ready in this state to leap to a conclusion that will in any way favor the false position it is taken. Not the position from the Quran, but a position that you have decided to take. Your opinion, which is considered shirk, the greatest sin in Islam. Where the heart is hard, there will be a general manifestation of prejudice on a great many questions. The attitude of the mind is so false, unjust, ungenerous, that it is not careful to weigh evidence and to be just in its judgments. But on the contrary, it will lead to conclusions, however unjust, and indulge various prejudices against persons, doctrines, communities, and indeed such a mind will reveal itself as a nest of prejudice. Give me some examples, folks. One of the examples is that homeless person that you see. He deserves that.
Yeah, judgment, prejudice, indifference, not the same.
Can you give me some examples? Do you agree with this?
Yes.
Does anybody disagree with this? Do you see this? Another of its effects and manifestations will be the absence of tender and kindly feeling. Especially will this be so in regard to all persons and things that stand related to the false position that one has taken. Suppose the mind is committed to money making. One of the effects and manifestations of this position of the will be an unfeelingness in regard with mankind, a want of tender and kind feelings in regard to the poor and the suffering. It reminds me of right after the Rodney King event in LA. I was a very young man driving a high-profile car on my way to the Juma one day, and I got stopped by the police. And that particular policeman, when he saw my license, didn't like it that I was a white Muslim. And so he shoved me on the back of my car and did a couple of things like that. It happens occasionally. There were no feelings. A man on a bicycle, I said, I feel very unsafe here. Would you please stay around? I'm scared. He said, well, you must have done something wrong or he wouldn't have stopped you. I said, gee, thanks. That kind of heart. How many times do we hear this? How many times do we drive by someone in the ditch and say, well, they should have got new tires? Or, well, that's their problem. We just don't have a heart for people. We're like that heart of stone. Am I the only one that thinks this way?
No.
Yes, brother.
Yes and no. I mean, at the same time, the world we live in now is very different. And, you hear about all this crazy stuff and things that go on. And especially because it's really put out there in the media, the rapes, the kidnappings, that kind of stuff. So you're kind of skeptical about, I want to help this person, but at the same time, should I really be stopping for a random person? So it's kind of...
Can we pray for them?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
If we can't change it with our hand, do we even think to pray for them? Or do we get haughty and proud and say, well, look at them. What is the condition of our heart when we see them? Do we care? That's where I want to know. If our hearts are hard as stones, then we don't care. Yeah, I appreciate it. I don't want my wife to get out of a car on I-4 and try to help somebody. I want her to be protected. But does she care? Does she? And I know she does. Because she'll say, oh, Shane, look, it's so hot. It's 100 degrees. And, oh, that's so sad. They have a flat tire.
But how that policeman knew you were Muslim who stopped?
When he said to me, I have your license and registration, sir.
Oh, so he was so clever.
They have to do that, by the way.
That
Okay. He wasn't a psychic or anything. When he saw that long name, he didn't like me. Yeah.
And you addressed the point.
And I had a turban on and a beard down to here and a jelly bean. That didn't fit the whole story.
That was the sign for this.
If the heart is hard in respect to God, in respect to Allah, it will manifest a want of appreciation in regard to almost all its relationships to Allah. This is a big one, folks. I want you to listen up. It's the month of Ramadan. That's why I'm doing this. And that's why I went crazy with this. As a matter of fact, I tried to go to bed last night after Tarawih, and I got up and I worked on this after 3 o'clock in the morning. Because I feel like we've got to change our heart. We've got to look at this stuff. We've got to acknowledge that this is where some of us are. We think this way, there's a problem. Muslims, healthy Muslims don't think this way. It will be unappreciative of the shame of sin. You see in Hadith al-Qudsi, there's one of the 40 hadiths that says, if you have no shame, do as you will. You see, there's a positive shame. I'm not talking about that kind of guilt that destroys you and paralyzes you. But if you do something wrong and you don't have any kind of feelings about it, that's not healthy. That's what I call a dead heart.
Yes.
Yeah, I just murdered somebody. It's sort of like that mentality. I just slapped my wife down. There's something wrong with that thinking. When you can do something like that and you're not affected, your heart is not affected, and it happens every day in our community. This kind of stuff is happening. When you go to the masjid and you're told you can't come in the house of God, you're a woman.
Yes.
Is that not the same thing?
Of course.
Or am I the only one in the choir that's singing wrong? Maybe I am.
No, you are not wrong.
It will not realize the nature of sin as consisting in the neglect of God. Some of us do not realize that when we sin, we're actually neglecting God, the one that's keeping us alive, the one that's keeping us breathing, the one that's keeping me standing up here.
Say that again.
Some of us do not. The hard-hearted will be unappreciative of the shame of sin. It will not realize the nature of sin as consisting in the neglect of God, His rights, feelings, authority, well-being. While such a mind may admit that such neglect of God is a sin, still the guilt of sin will not be realized, will not be felt. The confession that this neglect is sin will be cold, heartless, and emotional. I'm sorry I did that, okay? Is that a sincere
No.
apology?
No.
Okay, I'm sorry. All right, I'm sorry, okay? Nobody's ever seen that before, right? And we think our hearts are soft,
No.
and that our hearts are not going to testify before Allah about the way that we treated others and disobeyed our Lord? When the heart is hard, the mind will manifest an inability to appreciate the necessity of an atonement, to honor God who has been dishonored by sin, and to honor the law.